I'm the interim chair of the Broadcasting Training Council. And this is an event that's been organised by Accreditation Secretary Steve Harris, which is looking at the potential that local television might have on relationships with higher education, which many representatives are here today. Huge thanks to the optometry people for giving us the facilities here, which look extremely useful and nice. And thanks to the students from City as well who were able to be here to film the event. Now, Steve's worked for a lot within the whole local television debate, so it's probably best if I hand over to him to explain where the local television debate is going to and start the ball rolling and discussions that we might have over what potential relationships might be for accredited courses and the industry. So Steve, if you would like.
Right.
Take your seat.
Welcome to everybody. There's a number of sort of starting points for this. For the BJTC, I thought it went back to 2009 when we had a meeting at City University and we talked about the opportunities for local TV. But then I was researching this particular event and I found myself widely quoted by somebody in the UK Press Gazette from 2009, along with Sarah Rowlands. Another starting point, and Lord Gordon will remember the occasion well, the Westminster Media Forum in January, when I asked of Keith Smith from the DCMS why his department and the Shop Committee had not given the slightest consideration to the potentially massive contribution of HE and FA to local TV, and he replied it was purely a commercial issue and hadn't even considered in the slightest regard what universities could do. As they say with barely hidden menace, Mr. Smith has subsequently left his post. Then Dan Cass asked me how much money has been invested in new accommodation, equipment and facilities in journalism and practical media teaching in further and higher education. And I started totting it up. And I see Leah Nietzsche there at the back, and £100 million in new buildings and everything, not necessarily just media. But I did my calculations based on what we do for media and for broadcast journalism, and the figure's well past £200 or £300 million. That's a public investment, and this is a way in which the universities can pay back into their communities. So there are overwhelming arguments. From a pure point of policy, and I have to state this because I need to do a few sort of basic housekeeping notes, the BJTC has always regarded the development of local television services as an immense opportunity for all accredited courses, which is a central part of today's conference. There are two potential approaches at this moment, and we enter the Brobdingnagian world of Jonathan Swift here, the top-downers facing the bottom-uppers. Essentially, as far as the BJTC is concerned, we need to maintain a careful balance here until the government announces its preferred policy, and the overriding consideration has to be which approach will enable our courses to optimise and maximise their involvement. We did invite officials of the DCMS along today, and there was a slight suggestion that possibly they might like to come along and make some sort of announcement, but they declined. However, I have a very clear statement which I ought to read because it sets the context. In terms of the HE and FE sector, the Local Media Action Plan discussed the sector and the potential role it could play within a new local TV framework. The Secretary of State has undertaken visits across the UK to discuss his key priorities and on occasion has met representatives from local education institutions and has been shown around some of the media facilities that exist. So we have been giving this consideration. We expect to publish a paper this month that will set out our proposals, timetables and steps going forward. So that's the official government position. And I think in terms of time, Dan might have a better idea.
I think this month is accurate.
Right, but we don't know whenabouts this month. The structure of the conference is fairly simple. Looking back, lessons from history, ILR, our experiences with local TV in the analogue world, delivery and the way in which the universities can organise themselves, and we've got lots of case studies to get through, and outcomes and action points at the end of it. I also need to say from a BJTC housekeeping point of view that a range of opinions will be expressed here. None of them are necessarily those of the BJTC, but those of the individuals expressing them. Credit, as we've said already, to the Association of Optometrists, to Bob Hughes, who's been immensely supportive. So we're very grateful for all the help and support and the sponsorship of this event that they brought. And Bob will explain to us why the optometrists are involved and why professional bodies like the optometrists could play such an important part in the development of local TV. We also have to say thank you to the team of students from City University, who've been facilitated by Liz and by Colette, so thanks for that. They are videoing this whole event. We hope to make a complete video, the whole event, which will be made available to all of you, and we should be sending copies to the DCMS, Ofcom and many other interested parties. And as I said to Phil Shepherd on coming in, we'd like to encourage all the independent organisations to take a chunk out and put it on your website as well, so we start getting the message going through about our approach and our potential contribution. This is a very packed programme, and frankly 3 hours quickly turned out to be a very short time indeed. So we're having to ask everyone to be very economical and to the point, following the very best broadcast journalism practice, keep it to 5 minutes or thereabouts. And as I said, think what stories you should be able to tell in 5 minutes as a broadcast journalist. It gives me very great pleasure to introduce to you one of the pioneers of ILR, Lord Gordon. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, my apologies for the slightly late arrival. I glanced in at the window, very glad I made it when I did, otherwise I'd been extremely bedraggled. I found the geography of getting round Blackfire Station somewhat beyond my limited orienteering skills. However, made it, glad to do so. Can I also apologise for being not quite a heretic in your midst, but at least a sceptic. I thought it would be better to be totally open with you. I'm quite agnostic about the possibilities for local television. I think anything dependent on advertising at the moment has got a huge question mark to it. Existing local media are going out of business right, left and centre, and one has got to be cautious as to the prospects for local television. I've got to go even further and say that even if it weren't successful in itself, it might draw enough advertising revenue to further damage existing local media like radio and press, and that's got to be borne in mind. Well, that's the sort of semi-negative bit out of the way. The bit I am genuinely enthusiastic about, and I imagine my reason for being here, is to say that I think quite definitely local works. There is no question of that in my mind. I therefore can make a statement that I hope is in no way bombastic, because the reason it is true is not because of any talent of the people running Radio Clyde, but rather the very nature of the local output. Radio Clyde at one point had a bigger audience, bigger share of audience than all 5 BBC services, national and local, put together. Now, as I've prefaced that remark by, that's not because our presenters were more brilliant, or choice of music more imaginative, or news bulletins more authoritative, or anything else. It's because we were local, based in Glasgow. BBC Scotland was based in Scotland, covering Glasgow and Edinburgh, and there are similar rivalries throughout the country. I know Glasgow and Edinburgh don't necessarily always speak to each other. So I'm quite clear that local works. I'm also clear that it's the one area that satellite cannot really totally trump terrestrial broadcasting. Because by definition it would be an absolute nonsense to have 400 or 500 channels beaming down and one of them is your individual locality. So satellite is uneconomic and therefore not a threat. I suppose the first questions I would have are about research, because it's got to be borne in mind that ILR became a success quite late in life. It was 15 years into its existence before we got very much above the 2% share of national advertising revenue. Now the reasons for that were partly sporadic coverage. I mean, just going back in history briefly, ILR started October 73. A Labour government was then elected in February 74. At that point pledged to abolish commercial radio. So the short lifespan was not looking too clever at that time. They changed their mind and allowed the existing 18 that were on the list to go ahead. The two in London was not the best place to start local radio. This is no criticism criticism of the people around Capital and LBC. It's just that London, frankly, tends to get national radio as its local service anyway. We were the next one up, and it was quite clear that Capital and LBC had done research, and it was so bad that they didn't publish it. So we made a promise that we would do research in weeks 5 and 6 on air come hell or high water, and luckily the research came out very good, not as good as it became later on, but still the highest share of any station in our area. The other point, this is worth mentioning perhaps in passing, is that with the 3-day week at that point, the peak point for radio listening was in fact 10:30 to 11 in the evening. And there was an interesting point about television withdrawal symptoms. Clearly when people had to switch off television, they desperately needed something, and they turned to radio. Later on, when there was an ITV strike, we thought, rubbed our greedy little hands, we thought, right, the revenue will pour in. It didn't. The audience just switched to BBC 2 or BBC 1. It didn't matter what it was, as long as it was something flickering on the screen before they went to bed. It didn't really move very fast until we got beyond the 19 stations in the early 80s and developed a credible research system. And so in your blog, I noticed reference to new forms of research. I'm not up to speed in that, to be honest, so I can't say anything. But unless you develop credible research, you won't have much chance of attracting national revenue. But maybe national revenue is not what the game's about. There has got to be an outlet for local revenue. There's got to be an outlet for people who hitherto hadn't thought of advertising, because the idea of buying a TV region is well beyond the purse, and either radio or press, for one reason or another, didn't quite fit what they were looking for. There might be a new market out there, and I suspect that I'd be very surprised if local television stations the size of, let's say, 1 million or under, were more than 50% national. I think the rest of it will be local. And the smaller they are, the less will be national and the more will be local. And in a way, the more that's local, the less you need credible research. Because the people actually are living in the community, know themselves whether other customers are listening to or watching the service. The other issue that I think I should touch on, because it affects the whole argument about a national spine or bottom-up approach, and there is some attempt to marry the two together. I don't know how genuine that attempt is, but we were limited to 9 hours needle time when commercial radio started, and we put most of that 9 hours into daytime programming. What is the television equivalent of playing gramophone records in terms of, frankly, taking up quite a lot of time and being at least moderately interesting to people? I think that's an important question which you've got. I'm not saying it's a question that's incapable of an answer, but it's one you've got to address. Now, it's either going to be some form of national spine that you opt into, or it's going to be some form of collective that you agree to create programming out of or buy in from elsewhere. All of those are possible solutions. I mean, ILR started off very much on the basis of growing our own throughout. I mean, in a funny kind of way, just because you ran out of creative ideas. We had one program that was recorded at 5 o'clock on a Saturday. Funnily enough, it was our lowest rated program. And it's just because people felt it wasn't a kind of real program coming in real time from real people. I think a federation of stations can easily cooperate with each other in commissioning something that's of regional, national, or indeed international interest.